but yeah, wow, what a time to be alive.
I know, seriously.
So you've been away now for like officially for over a year, right?
Yeah.
Has it been?
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to remember when we hung out in San Francisco, we got espresso over a Blue Bottle at the Ferry Building, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That was our last
with Pia.
IRL.
That was the last time we saw each other. Yeah.
And then I think at the time you were getting more active with climate change related stuff.
Yeah.
That was the core. And I think what I can tell is it seems like that's still kind of top of mind for you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's still like one of the big emergency right now that we need to deal with. But on top of the climate emergency, we are now facing also a sanitary emergency, economic emergency, you know, and social unrest. Wow, what a year. Jeez, like when we met last time, right, could we have imagined that 2020 would look the way it's looking right now?
Everything felt so naive and safe.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, so since then, like, so yeah, like I've been kind of trying to focus more my attention on the climate emergency, and I you know, I tried to help the best I could the movement Extinction Rebellion in London and in Brussels, and so this movement for the climate emergency, they're basically doing civil disobedience in a non-violent way, but to put the climate emergency on the map. And they get like a couple of hundreds of cities around the world who have declared a state of climate emergency. So they definitely had some impact for sure.
And what does the civil, what does it look like? Is it people in the streets? Is it protests? Is it online?
Yeah, it's mostly on the street, but basically like they do various different type of actions. What we call die-in, which is basically people laying on the floor pretending they're dead. Blocking traffic, you know, trying to maybe chaining themselves to office doors of, you know, fossil fuel companies or banks that are investing in fossil fuel and so on. And so they do like actions that not necessarily with a lot of people, but that are very disruptive, with the goal to basically show people that this is an emergency to the point that people are actually willing to be arrested for it, right?
So is that what's happening? Is when you do this, like in London, they'll get arrested, they get thrown in jail for a night or two, or how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for those type of, because it's non-violent and you don't damage any property and then damage, you know, you don't hurt anyone. Like you get arrested for up to 24 hours. I got arrested 3 times now.
You did?
Yeah.
Was that the first time you were ever arrested?
Yeah.
And how was it?
When you get arrested with 300 people, it is actually,
Wait, I mean, it is an experience.
Yeah, so the first time I got arrested was in Brussels when we did a big action here. And yeah, we were 300 people arrested, basically. And so when you are arrested with 300 people, you realize that, oh, wow, that's interesting. Like for the police to arrest 300 people, something must be going terribly wrong in our society, right? Because it's not like they're arresting hooligans that are destroying and looting the space, right? They're literally arresting people from all ages, grandparents, kids, you know, and they are doing that in a quite violent way with pepper spray, with water cannons, and people who were genuinely non-violent, and people who, you know, not the usual people that you see in those demonstrations, like people, you know, in suits sometimes too, right? Like, and then it just shows like how much.
Does it have some of the same feeling as like the, you know, like the 1%er against Wall Street? The what do you call it? The thing that
Occupy Wall Street.
Do you know the one? Do you know the one? What was the name of the thing? It's so.
Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy
like
Wall Street.
We are the 99%.
Yeah. Does it feel like that kind of thing?
In some ways, yes. I mean, it's also like kind of a totally decentralized movement. There is no hierarchy. It's totally flat organization, and which on its own is actually very interesting and an experience to learn. But But it's different in the sense that here it's not about people fighting for their own interests, so to speak, against
Right.
inequalities and for them to, because we are the 99%.
It's more like
about people like saying like, hey,
commons.
like I'm not asking you anything to do for me. I'm just asking you to take seriously what scientists are saying in the IPCC report, that
Right.
this is a real emergency. We are running out of carbon budget. We are not on track to hit the milestone we are supposed to hit to respect the Paris Agreement and so on. We need to do something about it. And we believe so strongly about it that we are not only going to do click activism and sign petitions, we are also going to put our own freedom on the line. We are willing to be arrested. And then when people see that, oh, wow, like people that are not used to see on the street, that are willing to do that, it is telling something. It's like, well, oof, something must be wrong. And then also, like for me, like that first time in particular of being arrested, like you also get to realize that the police violence, that you might think that, well, it's only police is only violent like against some minorities or whatnot, and then you realize that for the first time you get to experience the way minorities are actually often treated, right? And that's actually, wow, it is, you need to experience it. And then you realize like, wow, like you are under pressure, you see how much the police is abusing its power. And I'm talking about Brussels. I'm not even talking about, in America right now, right? With Black Lives Matter. It's like incredible what's happening, right?
This is, so your 3 times being arrested, they were all in Brussels?
Yeah.
And is it a police force similar to the way the US police force might be arranged, or are there some key differences?
I mean, I don't know. I've never been arrested in the US, so I cannot compare. And from the images that I see, it looks to be much, much, much worse in the US for sure. No point of comparison. But that said, like I think it's interesting, and people don't realize that it's not because you are in Europe that things are necessarily much better. And also people of colors here are also like being definitely much worse, mistreated by the police. And that's a real issue in our society, that we are slowly, our society is slipping towards a police state, really, that is not being held accountable for all of those issues. And that's fucked up.
Yeah. So you often, I always think of you as kind of a bit of, kind of not, I wouldn't say purely activism, but maybe it's activism combined with like creation or media or some like storytelling. So I wonder, when you're doing this thing, are you like creating a story? Are you taking photos, or are you sort of laying it out? Are you building a narrative to help kind of amplify the story or give it more body? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I mean, first, like I'm fundamentally convinced that to deal with the climate emergency, first, I think in many ways it's too late. Like we've seen the sky in San Francisco, going, red and all of that. Like, I think in many ways, like this is only the beginning, and we're gonna have to shift gears towards how do we build resilient communities to face the consequences. And for me, like the best way to be resilient is going to be to decentralize and empower local communities and make sure that they are resilient on their own. And so we kind of need to change the fabric of our society, like this concept of nation states and top down and hierarchies. That is just not going to work in this new world that requires a deep adaptation. There is a very interesting paper with that name. You can Google it, Deep Adaptation.
Called Deep
that talks a bit about that. Deep adaptation, yeah.
Okay.
Like how we're going to deeply adapt to this new reality. And we're gonna have to be much more agile. It's not going to be the United States or even Belgium for that matter. Like we need to have local communities. We need to get to know our neighbors. We cannot be self-sustainable on our own as individuals. We need community. But we need to relearn to build community.
So do you have a kind of hypothesis personally, or like a proposal for how, this restructuring would work? Like if it's community-based, does it grow out from all these decentralized places, and does it impact the nation state borders, or where does it grow from? Does it start with finance? Does it start with activism? Does it start somewhere else?
I mean, it's hard to tell, because like when you see like past big revolutions, like it's actually not a single. We like to tell the story that it's a Rosa Parks, or it's Gandhi or Martin Luther King, or who made those change happen. But actually, it's a lot of people who've been putting pressure on different levers, right? And only some levers made it through the storytelling of history.
Right.
But fundamentally, it's a lot of people who've been pressing on different things. So I think like here, like same thing. Like I think like we need, in many ways, Extinction Rebellion is following on the footstep of Occupy, and XR is probably not the final movement. There's going to be probably other things that's going to happen after that. There's been Greta Thunberg. There's been a lot of work. There's not the lockdown and COVID-19 that is also definitely contributing to the urgent need to change things. So it's hard to tell where really it's going to start. But fundamentally, I think that we see more and more people through this crisis that start reconsidering their priorities. And when we look at, I saw like this tweet the other day, which I'm going to read because I think it was absolutely brilliant and really encompass all of this. Maybe I'll share the link after, but world on fire, pandemic unabated, fascism rising. My boss, how is data analysis going? Right, which I think it's interesting, right? We are all in this like kind of surreal world, and then we have our boss asking us like, hey, how is your assignment doing, or whatever. And then a lot of people are started kind of realizing like, crap, like really, like this, we are such a pivotal point in human history, in our society, and I'm optimizing some pixels.
Right. So how does it? I mean, it seems like this can flow from a bunch of different places. There's lots of pockets of energy that are coming together to there's both like the brand names that have emerged around this, and just like probably a groundswell of activity. But are there specific, like, do you expect that the pressure will mount to change some sort of legislation or is there some sort of like a global unified new policy, like a new accord or something that will help kind of everybody? Because it feels like everybody needs to coordinate on this, right? Everybody needs to agree. If you're gonna have some sort of carbon emissions thing, it needs to be more almost like globally planned instead of maybe nation state planned.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to tell. I'm not sure. Like we've seen, like China, who just committed by 2060 to be carbon neutral, which I think it's a pretty strong statement. I mean, we don't know yet if that really is going to happen, but at least it's a very massive, strong statement. I think like what's interesting is going to see like the rise of authoritarianism. That's a big debate that we have now, and we said with Trump, who is clearly like an authoritarian. And then China, that is also an authoritarian state. And then in between, you have those democracies that haven't been performing so well dealing with COVID-19. I think like the light that I see in all of this is more Taiwan, that has been doing very well. And I don't know if you are following Audrey Tang. She's
following who is it?
Audrey Tang. She's basically the Minister of Digital. The youngest minister for Taiwan. She was elected when she was 35, I think. She's a non-binary person, and she's been doing an amazing job there, where bringing a lot of radical transparency, a lot of participation, and so it kind of shows like a third way for our democracy to go forward, right? To not go the Trump way, not go the China way, but maybe there is a third way. Which we cannot keep our democracies the way they are, because they don't work anymore. That's the blunt reality, right? They've just been way too much being in the hands of the economy. All our public institutions are basically, they can only talk about one thing, which is the GDP, right? Growth, jobs, and those are absolutely not aligned with the need of the well-being of the population and the planet, right? There's an it's not working.
So what are the main things, like what are the sort of main tenets that Taiwan, or that sort of Taiwan has adopted, or that they're following? Kind of what's this new experiment?
So, I mean, they basically try to to apply like open data, push that to the limit, to as much as possible, and get people to participate. So, for example, like they had an API to get access to the stock of masks in every single pharmacy, updated every 30 seconds.
Wow.
Right. And so with that, they had someone who just doing a hackathon or something, like build a map to show that, so that people wouldn't have to wait in line and could basically go to the right pharmacies.
Managed data, or government had pushed the pharmacies to manage that, or how does that work?
Yeah, because it's a single payer, healthcare system. So they already had a system where they had basically the stock of all the pharmacies. And so they just added a line item, which is mask. And that's how they used that existing infrastructure to distribute the mask to the population. And then they just opened the API so that now everybody could know exactly in real time where are the masks.
Right.
And so that's
interesting.
Like,
to
me,
like big switch is you need to get the data available, right? Like I think there was this thing, was it called Sunshine or something, where you could request a certain data asset to be unlocked by a government. Have you heard of that program?
No, I haven't.
It was maybe 10 years ago. It might be, I don't know if it's municipal or state or federal, but I think so. Effectively, like one major way, maybe that's thing that's working well in Taiwan is they have both. In this case, they have like a single payer system, and they can actually have the data available. So open data is like one potential exciting solution.
But open data is great, but I think like the fundamental thinking here is the concept of collective intelligence.
Yeah.
Right, is the fact of moving away from those hierarchies, right, and in many ways linked to patriarchy, really, where you end up with a lot of men. I mean, look at the U.S. Congress, right? How much is the U.S. Congress representing the U.S. population? How many Black people are in the U.S. Congress? How many artists? How many entrepreneurs? Right? How many and the list is really long. How many teachers? Right, of course, all the U.S. Congress, but it's the same for the Belgian Parliament, that represent nothing. They don't really represent the population, right? So we are not living in democracies. That's just like, that's a joke, right? And so, and also beyond that, there is also like so much like bargaining for votes and regulations and stuff that pushed by lobbying groups and so on. That there is also like very little collective intelligence, because people are forced through bargaining to vote a certain way or not. And so like one of the steps to get better decisions making together, that's going to be more in line with the development of the well-being of the population and the planet, is to bring more different perspectives, right? And so to have more perspectives, you first need to have open data and more transparency, because you cannot solve a problem that you cannot see. And if it's only a limited number of people, always the same, usually old white men, that have access to the data and can pretend, then they think they know better, and then you end up in this situation, which doesn't work. So you need to open the data, and then you need to make as many different perspectives to the table. And so one of the concepts being pushed, for example, by Extinction Rebellion is the concept of citizen assembly, which is this idea of, instead of having a representative democracy, or next to it, you also have, like by sortition, you randomly pick up people in the population, which mathematically is going to give you a much better sample of the people who actually live in the place, in the region, in the country. You make them sit in front of a panel of experts. They're going to talk about whatever topic needs to be discussed. Could be the climate emergency, could be nuclear or no nuclear or whatnot. And they can hear different perspectives, and then they're gonna, debate and take a decision together. And that's very interesting, because you really have a much better democratic results, because you have different people, teachers, artists, nurses, who get to vote, but it's not like the Brexit referendum, where you ask a question and you have no idea if people took the time to read the manual and vote knowing about the in and out of it. No, here you make sure that people are brought up to speed, which of course you cannot do that with the entire population. So you take a representative small sample of the population.
Right. It reminds me a
little
little bit of
really good balance.
yeah, if you had to find an analogy, I think like the voir dire system of the jury selection.
Yeah.
For it's maybe the closest example we have to something like this. It's it's different, obviously, but it's trying to get a cross section of jury of peers to help weigh in and make a decision on something. And then how would that would be kind of to do some sort of information gathering, but then that would be going to a panel. Would that panel have been like elected, or how is that panel that random population cross section is being chosen? Who are they?
Yes, we just
did
that in France actually for the past 6 months. 1 weekend a month, people will meet. I don't remember. I think there were more than 100 people. I don't remember exactly the number. You can look it up. And so yeah, so there is a couple of experts well known in the field. In that case, there was the climate emergency. But then the assembly can also ask to see someone different if they want to. So the experts are not imposed on them really. But the point is to get them, for example, people both going to be pro or against nuclear, right? So that they can hear the different perspectives. But then as a teacher, as an artist, as a mother, as a grandparent, they can provide their different perspective because they look at the problem from a different angle, obviously.
Yeah.
And then we can make sure that when we take a decision, we don't forget to think about those different realities, because we've seen that problem a lot with the lockdown, for example, where we were taking like lockdown measures, but okay, but how does the lockdown measure apply to a boarding school? How does it apply to, it's one thing when you live in the countryside, but it's very different if you live as a family in a, in an overcrowded building, right?
Yeah.
In New Jersey, right?
Yeah.
I don't know where.
For sure. Yeah, that's cool. So this, all of the kind of the climate emergency is actually, an interesting framing for the other stuff you mentioned you were interested to talk about is the community tools. So I wonder, like, I think last we chatted in depth about open collective. I think that's one type of community tool, and maybe that has a role to play here, and I'd like to hear that. But then I think also, are there community tools like emerging, or are there new ways that people are using online tools, maybe with these open data sets or with different sort of people assembly online? And yeah, sort of what's new there, what's happening there, what's exciting?
Yeah, so Open Collective is one of the tools of the toolbox. So the idea of Open Collective was, how do we enable those bottom-up grassroots movement? Like, it's easy, you get with a few friends in your city, you start a group of Extinction Rebellion or Fridays for Future or any of those groups. And then if you need some money to make some stickers, banners, whatever you may need, how do you do that? You're not going to create a 501c3, it's a pain, just for collecting some money. And so the idea of Open Collective is to basically virtualize existing nonprofits so that you can basically just rent a slice of it, right? And so we've seen also with the COVID-19, there is a bunch of mutual aid groups that popped up. And also now with the fires in California. And so we have a 501c3, the Open Collective Foundation, that is basically that people, any grassroots movement can basically leverage. And so they have their page, and they can quickly start collecting money. And one of the key elements of it is that everything is transparent, right? So it's open data by design. And so everybody can see how the money is being spent, right? And so that really also enables the group to more easily start working together. So that's one of the things, and we've also been using for Extinction Rebellion in various different chapters across Europe. But I think like beyond the money, there is also like definitely a need for other tools. What I've seen is that it feels to me that all of those grassroots movements and citizen initiatives, like people doing a community garden together, shared compost, you name it, all of those different citizen initiatives, to me, they feel like the open source movement back in the 90s, where they would still each be on, SourceForge, if you remember back in those days. They would have their own custom website and their own repository. And then if you wanted to contribute, basically you had to, get to the news group of it and learn the ropes. And it was fun back in
Kind of
those
old
days.
school internet. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And so every time you wanted to start a new open source project, it was like the barrier of entry was kind of high. And so it feels to me that there is a need for a GitHub equivalent for all of those communities. You know, what will be the platform where, okay, on GitHub, actually you start an open source project. I mean, GitHub has done so much for the open source community, right? Now creating an open source project is just a few clicks and you have everything ready. You have a page you can share with a README. You have a place where people can file issues, a place where people can download the code, can file a pull request, comment on it. It's brilliant in many, many ways.
Yeah.
And that enabled an explosion of innovation in the open source community, right? Thanks to which the entire startup ecosystem was able to thrive, and without which it would have been able to thrive, right? And so the question is, how do we get the same lever, basically, to also see an explosion of citizen initiative, of grassroots movements, of local communities who start becoming resilient, start developing their own economy and so on, right? And that's still missing today. And I don't know who's going to build it.
Is that economy something, do you imagine that economy is kind of this transparent ledger donation system, or are there other mechanisms that would sort of add more structure or responsibility, outside of just the donations? Maybe there's something subscription related with kind of a direct exchange of value, or do you think those kinds of systems are just, it's too raw today for such a thing, or are there use cases where that kind of thing makes sense?
Well, the hard thing is that it's a bit more like, I feel like a WordPress model where you're going to have plenty of plugins because every community is a bit different in some ways. So it has to be fairly easy to customize to your community needs. But basically, like, it's actually not rocket science neither. Because like basically when you start a community, an open source project, a student initiative, whatever, you basically need a quick online presence where you can describe what you do, a way where people can sign up to your newsletter, a calendar, an email where people can reach out and you can have multiple people to read that email. None of those things are rocket science, and a ledger like basically Open Collective is doing today. But right now there is still no single package for that.
Yeah, it seems hard to I think if I were starting a community movement, I don't think I would think of GitHub as the starting point for it.
Yeah, no,
it's hard to really make your presence, right? So have you played with Ghost, the blogging software?
Ghost, great
amazing
product.
Oh my god, so good. I've been struggling so much, setting up a bunch of different like blogging software over the years, and there's really some quirks, or something gets too advanced that it grows up beyond what you actually want, and then there's all these extra things you have to remove to get it to do what you want. And then Ghost is just like, oh, amazing. It just does everything you want, nothing you don't want.
It's a breath of fresh air. Yeah.
Breath of fresh air, exactly.
Absolutely.
So I feel like a community, if you want to start a new movement, I feel like starting somewhere, maybe it's starting on something even simpler like Twitter or like Instagram or something, to sort of get the ball rolling on an idea. But I think as soon as you want to sort of own a little bit more of the presence and brand and linking to places and as kind of a substantial thing, it feels to me like the website is the first thing. Is that the way to think about it, or is there something else?
No, I think the very first thing is creating a WhatsApp group.
Okay, yep. That's a good point.
The very first thing is actually bring people together that, you have an idea, I want to do this. You find 2, 3, 4 people that think like, yeah, this is a good idea and I want to contribute to that. And then your first step is to have a communication channel. And it's either going to be an endless email thread, or it's going to be a WhatsApp group. Or if you do XR, it's going to be a Signal group, if you do something a bit more like civil disobedience. But then like the big problem that I've seen in those WhatsApp and or Signal groups is, to me, like the biggest missing feature that I would love to see is a wiki. Every group, every WhatsApp group should have a pinned link where you basically have an equivalent of a very bare-bone Google Doc, so that you can start accumulating as the conversation is going, and you can keep like, oh, that needs to be added to the things to remember about that group.
Yep. I love that. I love that so much. You know what? I was actually talking to my wife about this last weekend. So she organizes a group and they're on Slack, and it's like a free community thing. So they don't pay for the search. And so there's all this information and knowledge that the group generates just by communicating with each other. And then, you know, if you don't pay whatever it is, $10 a person per month, then you just lose past 10,000 messages. And so there's all of this human knowledge that gets digitized and is legible in a digital format and searchable. And then because of the business model of Slack and how it's not really compatible with communities, like it all just evaporates and is no longer useful to people.
Yep. And it's telling that actually a lot of people, you know, use Slack, for example, for their community, but Slack never really, I think there was a missed opportunity there for Slack. Never really focused on that.
Well, I guess it's a divergent set of needs, right? Like the things that a business needs and is willing to pay for is different than what a community needs. So
that's right.
You know, obviously, like, you know, I think Discord maybe is the canonical example that would be built for the community use case where, you know, you're not paying per member per month and stuff, and they have server boosts and stuff that have a different, you know, ethos of monetization versus kind of the per employee per month. But I actually just talked to a guy. Have you seen circle.so?
Yes.
Super cool. I just talked to him earlier today. Super cool product.
Great.
And like everything they're doing is just how you'd want it. It's just like simple SaaS tool. So it's not like the Discord, you know, video gamer thing. And then it's not the pay per user per month, but like you can actually manage the community and kind of have creative control as a creator. And I just love what they're doing. He showed me kind of all the details of the product. It's super cool.
Great. I haven't looked at it in depth, but I would love to spend more time on this. But to me, like, no doubt, this is the future. We're gonna see more and more communities, especially as it becomes more and more obvious that those public places like Facebook or Twitter are becoming like more and more destructive for democracy and for our well-being. I don't know if you get a chance already to look at the Social Dilemma on
Which
Netflix. One? The Social Dilemma.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet. No, I've seen little clips that people posted, but I haven't seen the whole thing.
Yeah, it's
is it good?
highly recommended. It's a must watch. And then you realize that basically fundamentally the biggest problem of Facebook and Twitter is their business model, is that you are the product, right? And so they built algorithms that are basically whose only job and only goal is to get your attention and then put some ads to the highest bidder. And that is a recipe for disaster. We are the product basically. And it creates so much bubbles, you know, we are each on our own bubbles, and it's a massive issue. And I see that also here in Belgium, like it's crazy. All of those Facebook groups are actually crazy. They bring people against each other. It's a health issue. It's a civil, you know, and they say in the movie, like it's like the risk of civil war, because fundamentally we forgot the ability to talk to each other, go beyond our own bubble, and realize there are other perspectives. And so the divide between Democrats and Republicans have never been wider than it is now. We tend to think that, we look at our timeline and we think that everybody thinks like us, so pretty much. And then actually we go out there and actually it's really not the case.
Right. Yep. Yeah, totally agree. I think it really does come down to the business model, because the trade-off is the internet kind of grew up with the expectation of free. And so if you cross the barrier from free to something paid, then there's at least narrative that like that excludes a certain set of people. And I think depending on what the price point is, that may be true, or maybe there's, you know, certain economies where people would be more excluded. But, you know, we haven't really seen anybody operate the alternative, which is like you come up with a different set of trade-offs for sure when something is paid. But, you know, I think a paid community is a great, you know, example of full alignment between like the people who are assembled and the value they're getting. And so if there's a platform that's, you know, monetizing by capturing some payment cut, or, you know, maybe payment plus infrastructure, that seems like fully aligned. Like you won't be trying to like manipulate attention in awkward ways. You'll just really be there to be of service, which really technology should be of service to us instead of, we're of service to
Should be a
kind of an
tool.
algorithm
I think technology it's a fantastic tool for humanity in many ways, and for citizens especially, right? Not so long ago, you had to have access to capital to be able to share ideas.
Right.
Not so long ago.
I think it actually can dramatically change even the things that we hold so fundamental to the technology landscape. So things like, imagine things like like photo sharing and search and and kind of like messaging. All these like primitives actually should work just as well in organizational units that are more community and direct pay oriented. So maybe it needs to start with a climate change direct pay community, and then there's enough of them there, and then you actually have like your whole graph there. You can actually message, and you're already paying each one. But as a bundle, maybe the whole thing can still be economical and useful, as a structure in the world. So I'm very excited about it. I feel like the whole internet is up for reinvention right now.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest driving force is going to be decentralization, right?
So when you say decentralization, it I think it naturally brings me. I know that in the past we've talked a lot about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in particular. I wonder how have your thoughts on Bitcoin evolved, and do you see it playing a role already, or do you still see it as kind of a future role to play, or sort of where's your head on that stuff?
Yeah, I still think it's fascinating. I still think it's the future, and I still think that it's still not ready yet for prime time use. It feels to me a bit like FTP or Gopher, or news groups back in the days before the World Wide Web. Right? Like almost kind of a research project. Super fascinating, super interesting, really great that it's a research project that has found its own business model to finance the research, which is brilliant. Brilliant.
We used to say, it reminds me of like mobile in the early aughts. People used to have this phrase, like we were building like mobile websites and stuff, and it was all very crappy and you couldn't use it. And people would say like, mobile is the future and it always will be. Because it felt like you were never going to get there. It was just, it's just like everything you do is a disaster. It's like some clunky T9 interface, and it takes forever to load up just a small text screen. And now we're just like, of course, we're streaming videos. Yeah, exactly. Wow.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So maybe Bitcoin is the future and always will be until until that.
No, but I think like, and we've seen that with the mobile, obviously, like it was true, right? It was the future, and now it's the past in many ways. But also like I don't know about you and with this lockdown, but for me, like in many ways, like I felt like less and less excited by technology. Like, because
tell me more. Do you
feels
feel like you've been in it too long, or your priorities have changed, the world's priorities have changed?
Yeah, it just feels like, geez, like it doesn't feel like there is any amount of new technology that's gonna solve this. That actually,
when you say technology, I assume you mean kind of internet and software, or do you mean even broader, like batteries and new energy stuff, or kind of broader technology, like capital?
Yeah, no, because software, like definitely, like I think there is no, I don't know, like it feels like I don't know, like it feels like when I see like we are trying to rebuild community in our own street, for example, and we see
I love
like
these experiments. I watch your photos where you take on like the parklet and you have the family out and you're doing like dinner at the parklet.
Yeah, so we moved into a house here in Schaerbeek in Brussels, and we don't have a car, but we have a garage door, so nobody can park in front of it. So we thought that, hey, this is an empty space. Let's put a shared community garden there, right? For the sake of it. And actually, it was magic during the lockdown, because as everything was shut down, like people walking by who still every day see nature continuing to live. And that was beautiful. But then the city sent us a threat of a fine because we cannot do that. And it was kind of, the timing was a bit weird because during the lockdown, like it was actually free to leave your car on the street. You didn't have to pay. And then they were complaining that we use that space. And it was for them privatization of public space, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because everybody else was basically, if I had a car, I could have put my car for free.
Right. You can privatize it if it's in that car, but you can't privatize it outside of the car.
Exactly. This is crazy. And I said like, well, but look, we didn't put doors and with a key, like this is public, this is for the community and people can plant and pick up stuff they want. And then like one day, so we responded and then we never heard back until one day they came at 5 a.m. with 5 people paid by the commune to take it away. And put it in the waste disposal. And that was actually
this is like the
move.
Local police force of Belgium, of Brussels. Okay.
It's like seriously, guys, like we are in the middle of a pandemic, economic crisis, climate emergency, and you really have nothing else to do. like seriously. But you know, the good thing is that like it turned that story into like an international story, and people started talking about it all around the world. And so it really backfired.
This wasn't one of your three. This wasn't one of your 3 arrests, is it?
No. That was not one of them. But it's funny because the police came and told us, hey, you cannot do that. But having the experience of being arrested before, I told them like, look, I'm not going to obey just because you ask. Like you're gonna have to try harder. And then and then it escalates to the mayor and so on. But then but it's interesting. I think like people need to realize that we fundamentally need a system change, not climate change, right, to face this new reality. And people need to realize that the laws have been written by the previous winners. Who were mostly the fossil fuel industry, fundamentally. I remember that when I started Storyfy, right, it was my first startup in Silicon Valley. It was all about, for people who don't remember, about telling stories by drag and dropping tweets and Instagram and YouTube and so into a narrative. But I asked a lawyer and he told me like, you cannot do that. It's illegal because the law says that you cannot take a picture that someone shared without asking for their written consent. You cannot just post it like that on CNN. You cannot do that. But that's because the law was written at the time where you didn't have a camera in every pocket. But turns out that actually when you do it, actually people are craving for more visibility when they share publicly a tweet. Of course, they want that tweet to be embedded on CNN.com. But the point is that like the people we need fearless citizens. Citizens who are going to do what's right, not what is allowed. Because turns out that what is allowed are actually, it's burning the planet is allowed. Literally.
So that is one of the things I love about every time we talk, I always hear a story about you. You're poking at something, right? Like you're not the type of person who's just like, okay, accepted, here's how it goes. But you're like poking and prodding and seeing where you can it's almost like a little mischievous almost, right? So I'm actually curious because I've always, as long as I've known you that way. But I wonder, you know, did you grow up that way? Were you that way when you were 5 years old? Were you that way when you were 8 years old? Is that the way your parents are? What shaped you to be that way?
I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm short, and so I always had to find ways to. Hey, I'm here. Hey, I don't know. No, but like when I was a kid, I started a magazine in the neighborhood. Always kind of was always been driven by, okay, how can we get more people to be able to share their perspective? And so at the time it was before the internet and young people didn't have really a place to express themselves. So it's like, okay, let's create a magazine for that. And then I don't know, like, I guess I've always been a bit rebel. Like I've always never really liked people telling me that things are the way they are because that's it. Like, don't ask questions. Like I always wanted to poke and see like, well, but why is it that way? Does it still make sense? Because a lot of things we do in society, actually, we do them because that's how we've always been doing them. We don't question them.
Right, right.
And so while there might be a good reason for why we were doing this way 50 years ago, a couple of things have changed in 50 years.
Right.
Starting with the internet. And now, again, with the COVID-19, arguably, things are never going to be the same again. And so we need to be able to revisit our assumption.
Right.
We need to be able to take a step back and say, like, hey, what is the right thing to do, knowing what we know today? And we need to be data informed, not data driven, right? And take ownership, take a responsibility. It doesn't matter what the law allows us to do or not. Like, this is about pretty much survival. Like, what is the right thing to do?
Right. But so I hear you saying you're not excited about technology anymore, but then you mentioned things like open data and about sort of new transparent systems and ledgers and stuff. So like, it sounds like you actually still have some excitement, if I'm not misreading.
Yeah, no, I mean, don't misunderstand me. I guess like, I still fundamentally believe of technology as a force for good. If it puts in the hands of citizens and citizens use it for doing good. I think the biggest problem right now of technology that has been be put in the hands of advertisers, which by design are trying to sell you something that you don't need, but that you want, that you may want.
Or even trying to generate the desire so that people want it.
Right?
And then
which
they can
is
sell it, right?
The beginning of the end for a recipe for overconsumption of natural resources. Right? So by design, this is wrong. By design, it is fundamentally wrong. And now we have the opportunity to you know, if you try to turn it off and on again, we should do that with the internet now. You know, with Facebook of the world.
But I would argue that that's going to happen.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's going to happen. So, I mean, my continued optimism and excitement around technology is that I think these cracks that you're pointing out actually do exist and will turn into gushers. You know, I think that we will see these community tools get built, and we'll see people establish direct pay relationships with the creators and the tools and the platforms that actually are more aligned. And I think in that world, I mean, it gives me tons of optimism for like the future, because, you know, we actually are going to reinvent all the information systems and all the kind of that drive the internet. So that's like one, but then, you know, that's the stuff I'm closer to and understand more about and play in. But I think there's stuff much further afield that I, you know, don't really spend a lot of time on, but like, how is new kind of, you know, energy generation, or what's happening with nuclear, or what is happening with battery technologies? And, you know, I'm not close enough to really opine on any of that, but to me, it feels like those kinds of things are some of the, you know, breakthroughs there are the kinds of things that can lead to substantial changes and evolution of what we are doing from a, you know, energy and world perspective. It feels like evolving and regulating our way there is going to be a tough path versus the disruptive ability to discover new things that serve humanity. I don't know if you would sort of generally agree with that philosophy, or you disagree.
I definitely used to agree with that, but less and less so.
Mind?
I changed my mind a bit. Yeah, because like we also, it's not going to be enough. Like, we are not going to solve the problem by replacing all cars with Tesla. First, the math doesn't work. Like in a city, not everybody can have a car. There's just no space for it. Second, it just still extracts way too much rare materials from Earth, which is being done in a very poor conditions. Not all externalities are being taken into account. And then we've seen that movie before, like you know, like you cannot ask a pyroman to stop the fire, and so Facebook is not going to self-regulate itself. That's just not possible, and I don't think that Tesla will self-regulate itself neither.
Right, But I wasn't proposing that either of those would self-regulate. In the Facebook case, I'm proposing, I think, like similar to what you were saying, is like some new disruptive force will come through, creating the platform that ends up becoming more useful. And just Facebook, will fade in importance relative to those other things. Not that it will die, but it will just fade in importance.
Yeah, like IBM and Microsoft before them, and maybe
which are still fine businesses, and they don't die, but they're not really where the action is.
No, so I think it's very likely. But when you remember, like back in the 90s, where we were fighting the hegemony of Microsoft, especially in Europe, right? The European Union was really after them, and then of course, like they were disrupted by Google, who was basically defining a new playing field.
Right.
But the question is, and I don't have the answer, but the question is was that really useful or useless what the European Union has done to trying to split them and find them like they did, and maybe did that distract them? Maybe I don't know. It's again about this theory of change.
GDPR
like, I think,
stuff for the.
Yeah, like there is a bunch of things now, and I don't know, like arguably like a movie like Social Dilemma or the GDPR and all of those things are contributing to more and more people starting to wake up to the problem that actually we need something different than Facebook.
Yeah.
Which will actually create a space for someone new to emerge, which might not have been possible before, right? So I guess it's more like, I guess like in the last couple of years, like I kind of stopped thinking of a silver bullet. I don't think there is a silver bullet. There is no like one solution. It's actually an aggregation of a lot of different people in different fields doing a lot of work, that eventually is gonna make the system flip over. And
but it sounds like we're sort of in agreement then that new technology, I guess old technologies are not going to self-regulate. I think we're in agreement on that. So we would say there's a multitude of things that will be tried and some things which will succeed and be emergent, but ultimately, like I would say I still hold optimism that there are solutions in technology. So it's not that Tesla will self-regulate to not consume the mineral resources, but that somebody else will invent something else that turns out to cure a lot of the problems that even Tesla might be causing relative to what the internal combustion engine automakers do.
Sure, and I believe in that, but I also believe that for that to happen, we need a lot of different skills, a lot of different people, a lot of different perspectives. And I think it's really, really easy to forget, especially in our Silicon Valley bubble, that actually we're gonna need researchers who are not in the bubble. We're gonna need, nurses. We're gonna need some politicians, some, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who are gonna speak truth to power, and other people like that. Because all of those people play a part in keeping the system in check, right? And I think there is a danger in thinking that technology in and on itself will get there. There is, and I think it's more like becoming more humble, maybe. That saying like, hey, no, it's Silicon Valley like needs to be part of the world community. Rather than, in many ways, it feels like Silicon Valley was trying to shape the world. Hey, everybody's gonna get on Facebook, and we know better what is the right algorithm, and and we'll apply some patch here and there to make you happy. I think, and that's where like a decentralized world will make more sense in many ways. But I guess the question is more like, how can Silicon Valley change their focus on towards being a good citizen, playing their part? Yes, we need Silicon Valley, but not to rule us, to play their part, to provide us the tools that we need, citizens we need and request to be able to play our role as citizens. We build local communities, make sure that there is no, crazy Trump people or Bolsonaro or whatnot, that are basically ruling over us and obviously not taking care of the planet and of our local communities, right? And so can Silicon Valley, Citizen Valley, here we go. That's we need Citizen Valley.
Tweet it. I like
it. That's what we need. And Silicon is one of the tools that we need.
Yeah. And I think we're already seeing, like, so I moved to Silicon Valley coming up on my 20th year anniversary. And back then, it was almost like this was the only place where anything new got, everything else was kind of a rounding error compared to here. So it's not strictly true there was nothing, but it's like, it was really, the hotbed, the almost, must have been 98% of all new, software and internet businesses. And today, I've got to imagine that I mean, you just visibly see it, with TikTok in China, that itself, love or hate, all the politics of it, but like, that's a force in the world that did not come out of these, 20 square miles or so around here. So, and I think there's just, there's like, hundreds of examples these days. So I think, Silicon Valley, is getting put in check to some extent by just the natural market forces of the world that create, I think, a certain type of, I think you need some like mix of confidence with being checked in power, so that you get a nice balance of like, try things, many of which are going to fail, and you keep trying despite the challenges, but you also don't get free reign to just run the table like you did back 10 20 years ago. Used to be once you sort of,
I think
at least not with the models that have been tried.
Yeah, I think like one thing that is a bit of a new data point now is this remote work. And when we see Pinterest getting rid of their office in San Francisco, and I think and so we see all of those engineers going back, because then they realize, oh, I don't need to be in San Francisco, I don't need to pay the rent there, I may as well be in Colorado or elsewhere, right? In Canada or in Brussels. Hey.
And you were early to this, right? You guys started this at least several years ago, was it? Because you were originally all co-located in New York.
So I moved to San Francisco like in 2009, and then did the first startup Storify, and then
Storify was fully
San Francisco, fully San Francisco.
Yeah. Okay.
And then Open Collective, started in San Francisco, and then Asim joined, and Pia joined. Pia was in San Francisco as well, and Asim was already in New York. And then we decided to. Then I moved to New York. Then Pia joined us to New York, and then I moved to Brussels. Pia moved to Madrid, and so we've been kind of remote from that moment on, and we didn't have an office anymore. But what is interesting to me is that if you don't have an office in San Francisco anymore, then all of a sudden, the water cooler conversation is not anymore about a cool new tech product for the sake of technology. The new water cooler conversation is actually with someone, your neighbor, who has very different problem and reality, for which you actually realize that, holy crap, actually I can be helpful. Because, I can just use an Airtable and that's gonna totally change their life. Right? And so what's interesting is that I think this is gonna force engineers to start applying their talent to solve real world problems. And that's, to me, very exciting. And so I hope that will contribute actually to getting to Citizen Valley, where all of those talents will actually start thinking about not what is the Uber for laundry when you are a single hacker, living in your one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco, but more like, hey, okay, like actually even in the city, and how are we going to help the nurses with this COVID-19, for example, who have not the resources that they should have? How are we going to create micro schools in every neighborhood? Are we going to? There is so much that needs to be done. And in many ways, when you see the red sky in San Francisco, you ask yourself, like, wow, have we been working on the right stuff in the past 20 years?
Well, that's good. I think I know we're a little over the time we had booked, so I don't want to run you too long. This has been a lot of fun, and I think ultimately what I'm hearing is Citizen Valley. So this still can be done. There's still stuff to be built and made for the world with technology to serve it, but we need different structures. We need different people in power, different perspectives. joining in to discuss and debate this and have a seat at the table there.
Yeah, my call I want to do to people in Silicon Valley who have been moving out of San Francisco during the COVID-19 is get involved in your local community. Mm-hmm. And you have no idea how much superpowers you have just because, you know, you know how to program. Mm-hmm. You can have a tremendous amount of positive impact in your local community. So go do that, because we urgently need to make those local communities, like community is immunity. Mm-hmm. So be prepared for the next lockdown, be prepared for the, you know, for the price of commodities and you know, of food that's gonna skyrocket in the next couple of years because of the climate emergency and stuff like that. And so we build community and use your superpowers to do that. Awesome.
I love it. Well, this has been fun. I'm glad we could hang out and catch up. Thanks for sharing.
Yes. Great. Thank you. Have a good one.